Now, just to give everyone, since we're doing the book style, inshallah ta'ala, just a little bit of an overview once again as sort of how I researched this particular subject or what I sort of tackled it with. The first book was the book Kitab al-Ruh by Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala. Kitab al-Ruh, the book of the soul. What's interesting about Kitab al-Ruh is that Imam Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah does not restrict his conversations or his discussions about the soul to after death. But he talks a lot about what the soul encounters while it is still here of the unseen, what it encounters of the Barzakh, what interactions exist between the souls here and the souls that have passed away. And so he focuses truly on building the concept of the soul from this side before he talks about the other side. And I really found that approach to be not just more convincing and affirming in terms of the way that we deal with the subject, but also more productive for us to really realize that we're interacting with these realms even though we haven't entered into them fully yet. So it's not just a matter of time before we enter into them. We're in fact entering into them on a regular basis, even if partially, and interacting with this realm as it exists from now. So he starts off with how we're interacting as souls with that world before actually getting into that world. The second book, and these are authors that we've covered in the late night reflections quite a bit, was أهوال القبور وأحوال أهلها إلى النشور. أهوال القبور وأحوال أهلها إلى النشور, which means the state of the graves, the conditions of the graves, and the state of its occupants until the day of resurrection. And this is a book by Al-Imam Ibn Rajab rahimahullah ta'ala. And Imam Ibn Rajab rahimahullah ta'ala focuses almost, in fact, exclusively, entirely on what's happening in the graves right now. What's happening of its punishment, what's happening of its reward, what are the people perceiving, what are some of the ahadith that we have from the Prophet ﷺ about their very particular and specific states. And he purposely cuts it off at the time of the resurrection. So, ila nushur, he stops at the day of resurrection. So he gives you that overview. So he covers that time span in detail. And then you have a work by, subhanAllah, a scholar that always writes with a lot of optimism. And that's Imam al-Suyuti, rahimahullah ta'ala, Jalaluddin al-Suyuti, who wrote a book called Sharh al-Sudur bi Sharhi Hal al-Mawta wal-Qubur. Sharh al-Sudur bi Sharhi Hal al-Mawta wal-Qubur. I'm saying it slowly so that the four note takers, inshallah, in the room can make sure they get everything. But Sharh al-Sudur means the expansion of the chest. Actually, that in and of itself tells you a lot about his approach. Alam nashrah laka sadrak. Have we not expanded your chest? That there's clarity and there's expansion of the heart, of the chest, when you study these things. And so it's meant to give you great clarity about the hereafter and great foresight into the hereafter. So Sharh al-Sudur bi Sharhi Hal al-Mawta wal-Qubur, by explaining the condition of the dead and of the graves. By the way, he wrote another book called Bushra al-Ka'ib bi Liqa al-Habib, which is, if you all remember, I did a series called For Those Left Behind, which is really about comforting the grieving. And Bushra al-Ka'ib bi Liqa al-Habib is talking about glad tidings for those who are struck with grief through the meeting of the beloved. And the beloved here, al-Habib, is actually Allah Azza wa Jal. So glad tidings to the one who is grieving for the meeting that they will have with the beloved one, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he writes with a lot of optimism. He writes with a lot of intentionality towards those who have lost loved ones and are trying to figure out what's happening to them and what will happen to them as well when they pass away. Then finally, you have Imam Ibn Abi Dunya, rahimahullah. Ibn Abi Dunya, rahimahullah ta'ala, is an author who's actually prior to Imam Ibn al-Qayyim. He's prior to Imam al-Suyuti. He's prior to many of these imams. And all of them largely cite his work. But Ibn Abi Dunya, what he would do is he would list out all the narrations on a subject. The authentic, the weak, the fabricated, the narrations from the companions. So he takes one subject and he lists out obsessively all of the narrations. So for example, on the Jannah series, primarily the book is Had al-Arwah by Imam Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala. But Ibn al-Qayyim is 80% of the time citing Ibn Abi Dunya rahimahullah ta'ala's book on Al-Jannah, his narrations on Al-Jannah, on paradise. Likewise, and Imam al-Suyuti is largely just citing Ibn Abi Dunya, but then giving his explanations of his books. So finally, these two books, Kitab al-Qubur, which is a very comprehensive book called the Book of the Graves, by Imam Ibn Abi Dunya rahimahullah ta'ala, where he gives all these narrations about a good ending, a bad ending, good states of the grave, bad states of the grave, what happens afterwards. And he also goes into some of the narrations about the fiqh of visiting the graves and how you should act, the etiquettes of dealing with the dead. And then there's a smaller book that he wrote called Man Asha Ba'd al-Maut, He Who Lives After Death. This is a book where it's just all over the place in terms of narration. So there's just stories about people that have interacted with the dead. So stories of children seeing their parents in their dreams after death, stories of people encountering strange things at the graves. So it's a very, I want to say mystical book, if you will. It's a treatise where he gives many stories, and it should be read with some caution because some of the stories can be even bizarre. And so it's dangerous to derive from those personal stories creed and jurisprudence, right? But instead to take them as they are, because if anyone has ever stood in the graveyard alone for a long enough time, subhanAllah, it's a place where everything starts to hit you in terms of the elements in very different ways. Like the clouds start moving in a certain way, it feels like the wind is blowing in certain parts. The certain graves seem to give off a sentiment. Like if you stand in a graveyard by yourself, subhanAllah, you'll truly feel some of these things, and you can't derive theology or jurisprudence as a result of that, right? But he gives many of these stories, of man asha ba'd al-maut, so the living after they have died, right? And the point is for those who would like to sort through those and then compare them to the books that have been mentioned, like Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah gives rules and rulings as a result of what is being encountered. Those stories can further affirm the heart and obviously can serve as heart softeners. Lastly, by the way, there's a book that I use for every Ramadan series that I do about the Akhir, which is a Tadhkirah by Imam al-Qurtubi rahimahullah. A Tadhkirah is like an encyclopedia of life after death. So the whole journey from the time that you die until paradise and hellfire, Imam al-Qurtubi rahimahullah, who, subhanAllah, as a scholar when it comes to being able to both cite the narrations and derive rulings from the narrations is almost unmatched. So a Tadhkirah from an Imam al-Qurtubi rahimahullah ta'ala is the last one that I will mention here bidnillahi ta'ala. Of course, other than that, different books were cited in smaller capacities.